Let's come back to iodine, a controversial supplement, not so controversial in food form. How often do you see somebody deficient in that? And can we use food only to replenish it?
Those are really good questions. Iodine is almost deficient across the board. I don't know if I catch cases that are not. And I would say we would see that in our general public too. A bit like thiamine with the rice and cassava, we have a lot of things that get in the way of iodine being absorbed. And so even if we're eating a good amount of iodine in our diet, we could still have real deficiencies. The other issue is that we really need it in each of our cells. We think of iodine with the thyroid, but we need it in every single cell of our body. So it's rather important. And because it does get displaced by the other halo chemicals, the fluoride, the chlorine, the bromide, especially the bromide these days, it's very easy to push out and miss. If you add in someone like myself who is constantly on a flight, the aerotoxic chemicals on a plane displace the iodine as well. So we just have a lot going against us with that. Now, there are good ways to get it that we often don't think of, like ruminants, especially on the West Coast, like up in Oregon where I used to live. The cows and the sheep, they're grazing on grass that's high iodine. It's coming in over from the ocean and getting into the soil. So you can get iodine in some interesting places, not just in seafood or seaweed, but but in general, it is pretty deficient. Now, it's not something I address directly in across the board because I try to keep the supplements down, right? I'm working with the microbiome, so we don't want to do a ton. There's some exceptions to that, but not often. So we might do like painting on the skin to get at some of the skin when there's a very specific need, like we have a thyroid condition, something like that, then we may address it. But I think to get back to your question about the controversy of it, there's a couple of things that go into that. One is the study that came out in the 50s using a very toxic form of iodine that no human should be consuming. And then that getting into the hands of practitioners and the public and that being associated with dietary iodine, which is very different. It doesn't cause those health issues. And then secondly, there are many things that we will react to if we don't have a cofactor or we don't have something else that is needed. For instance, to take it to another area and I'll bring it back. Folate. A lot of people who have MTHFR and supplement with folate, they feel worse, right? So they stop. Well, if you feel worse when you take folate, that means you're actually missing B2. You're deficient in B2, ribose. And if you had enough of that, you'd feel great when you take folate. Okay. So very similar to that is the iodine, especially in Hashimoto's, right? Hashimoto's folks are usually terrified of iodine, often because of their experience, right? They've had a bad experience with it, where it kind of like crashed their thyroid or it made them much worse. But that happens when you don't have enough selenium. So anyone with Hashimoto's would need to do selenium first for a significant amount of time, at least a month, before trying low doses of iodine and then slowly going up. And then you don't have that kind of trouble. But yeah, those are the main reasons why iodine has been on the hot seat, so to say.
You mentioned this older form of iodine that's toxic. What is that so we can be aware of it?
Oh, no, there's so many though. There's actually many forms of iodine. So, like when you go and get a CAT scan, right, they're going to infuse you with iodine, and that's not as bad as the one that was used in the 50s, but there are multiple forms of iodine. It's a bit like with any of the minerals, like if you take well, magnesium, we were talking about that before, right? We've got malate, we have glycinate, we have taurate, we have oxide, we have citrate. There's so many different forms, and many of them are not meant for us. And that's just part of being an animal or human. We're not meant for all of them. Mhm.
So if somebody is going to supplement with iodine, what form do we want to look for?
The potassium is very good. So I love iodoral. I know a lot of people use Lugol's, and I'll do that on the skin. And Lugol's is a great company. No dish, no, no slant on iodoral, but on Lugol's. But I like iodoral because it comes in small amounts that you can get to very high amounts. Often people need 300 micrograms. They'll stop at like 12. They often need to go up higher. And at that company, they make these tiny little pills that are very specific, so you can strategically increase slowly and see what's working for you while you work with your practitioner. So I like that, because when we're working with the liquids, it's easy to get too much, too little, to not be very specific. And then you don't really know where your perfect dose is.
When it comes to iodine, does the average person need to supplement? It sounds like we possibly would. You mentioned the fact that if the animals are eating certain foods, we can get more through the food. But the average person on a maintenance type plan for their health, would they need to supplement, and in what range?
It would be a really good idea. It's not something I tend to tell people to do. It's not something I do myself. So I want to be clear about that. But honestly, when you ask it that way, yes, it would be a really wise one to do preventatively and long term. Because even now, so I'm at a hotel right now, I'm sitting on a chair. This chair is going to be soaked in bromide, and that bromide is touching my skin. And as it does so, I'll absorb that and I will displace the iodine from my cells. So I will lose iodine just from sitting on this chair and being in this room with this carpet and this sofa, right? So when we actually look at it scientifically, yes, that's really wise, because if you're consuming iodine regularly, it prevents the bromide from being absorbed instead, right? So it's very preventative. It's a really good thing. I do tend to have folks like pilots and airline attendants, those folks, to do the iodine preventatively. But I've never been big on those, the kind of mindset, and this is not correct, actually. So I just want to state that that's kind of my point of view. I tend to not be big on that. Like, these are your top 3 things you should take. But if I was going to add one to the top 3, iodine would be in there, probably along with like the animal form of A and benfotiamine, right? Because those are the things that we're really lacking and that lead to the cancers and the toxic buildup and some of those things. So those would be more preventative. But yeah, it would be a good idea to have the iodine. It would.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch a full episode. I'll see you over there.
We've been told to push fiber and that it's good for bacterial diversity, but diversity doesn't equal health. What equals health is what bacteria are in the gut. We like to think the microbiome is the gut. It's not. It's everything. Getting a lot